A few months ago, my friend Emily called. I met Emily 7 years ago when we served as young adult volunteers with the PCUSA in Northern Ireland. During our year of service, we lived in an intentional community with 5 other people, and we were divided between 2 houses. For that year, we became each other's family. And it was filled with incredible moments. And at the same time, it was really tough. We celebrated birthdays and holidays together. We vacationed together and supported one another. But we also disagreed, and we argued, and we fell short, and we hurt each other. Looking back on that year, it took a lot of listening, a lot of grace, and a lot of forgiveness. It's a year that changed my life, filled with people I adore. And yet, I refuse to have any kind of roommate when I move back stateside. When Emily and I were talking, we had a great time catching up. And about halfway through the conversation, she asked me how I felt about a Zoom call that we had had with the rest of our Northern Ireland group a few weeks ago. And we both agreed that it was wonderful to be together and to hear what everyone was up to. But at the same time, we both shared how hard it was. We were so grateful to see these faces of people we adored, yet we lamented at how much stayed the same and how we interacted as a group on that call. As we were talking, Emily said, family is weird. And our scripture reading this morning is all about family. So often we think of this story as the story of Joseph. There are countless retellings of this narrative. Joseph and the coat of many colors, Joseph and the amazing Technicolor dream coat, or Joseph, King of Dreams, just to name a few. Many of these stories follow Joseph as the protagonist. However, as we read the beginning and the end of this story, we realize that we're following Jacob and his family. Genesis 37 verse 2 sets the stage clearly by saying, "This is the story of the family of Jacob." And so while the story may be following Joseph's narrative, it begins and ends with Jacob's family. Scholars believe that by framing the text as a family story is crucial as it wraps up this first book of the Bible. By doing so, it tells us that while Joseph is taking center stage for most of this time, there is a broader narrative at work. And so as we follow the family of Jacob in these final 14 chapters, we watch a family navigate conflict, anger, betrayal, secrets, grief, favoritism, and more. This is a pattern of behavior that has been ingrained for generations in this family's lineage. As we look back over the book of Genesis time and time again, we see siblings at odds with each other. We remember stories of Cain and Abel and Jacob and Esau. We encounter lies and deceit, like when Jacob is tricked into marrying Leah when he really wanted to marry Rachel. Then there is also the consistent favoritism among parents. We watch Abraham pick Isaac over Ishmael, and Isaac's favorite child was Esau, while his wife Rebekah's favorite child was Jacob. And we continually watch how these create rifts in family and struggles, and how these families struggle to reconcile and forgive each other. All of this history, all of these stories, all of these ancestors are brought into focus as we watch these family dynamics take shape in the story of Jacob's family. We watch as Jacob favors Joseph, giving him this coat of beautiful colors. And we watch Joseph in turn give bad reports on his brothers and runs around sharing his dreams about how sheaves of wheat and stars in the sky will bow down to him, causing his brothers' hatred to grow among his older siblings. And while not in our text for today, we know that ultimately the family is split, like many families in the book of Genesis, as the older brothers sell Joseph into slavery and lies to their father saying Joseph has died. This sets a journey into motion that would eventually bring Joseph to find favor with Pharaoh in Egypt, becoming a high-ranking official and one of Pharaoh's trusted advisors. And this creates further straining interactions between these family members. And this leads us all the way to chapter 50, the moment where this story takes a turn that we haven't really seen before in Genesis. One of my favorite books as a child is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This is a thrilling tale of 4 siblings who enter a magical world through a wardrobe, and they set out on adventures filled with twists and turns. The first time I read this book, I read it with my grandma when I was in the 2nd grade. Each night before bed, we would sit in my room and read a chapter together. I loved the magical land of Narnia. However, what I remember most about this book was how many times we heard the words, "I'm sorry." The moment I remember most is when Edmund returns to his siblings after being held captive by the Snow Queen. I remember this passage so well because I remember as my grandmother read these words to me. Edmund shook hands with each of the others and he said to them, "I'm sorry." And everyone said, "That's all right." And then everyone wanted to say something, which would make it quite clear that they were all friends with him again. Something ordinary and natural. And of course, no one could think of anything in the world to say. After reading that part, my grandma turned to me and she said, "Forgiveness is hard, especially when it's your family. Just because you forgive someone doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you are choosing to keep moving forward, choosing to hope that things can change, and showing that you are helping to make that change." My grandmother in that moment was speaking honestly and openly about what was on her heart. So when I think about forgiveness, I find myself holding C.S. Lewis's naming of a loss for words with my grandmother's truth about her experience with forgiveness. Reading these final verses of Jacob's family, I'm also reminded of this moment. It's the first thing that came to my mind, this sharing with my grandmother. And so as we listen to what's going on in with this family in chapter 50, it has me thinking about what Joseph chooses to do in that moment and what was going on around Joseph. Joseph in this moment is listening to his brothers lie about his father's last wishes while he is simultaneously weeping over the loss of his father. And yet, he makes the choice to reconcile with his family. He chooses to speak kindly to them. During our Wednesday night Bible study, we were talking about this passage, and Adina mentioned that she likes to think that Joseph knew his brothers were lying, and that he was weeping for all the grief and pain in his life. That Joseph also wept for all the generations of his family, the rifts, the curses, and the violence. that Joseph held all these things and still chose to say enough. Rather than perpetuating the generational cycle of family dysfunction, Joseph speaks kindly to his brothers as he says, "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? Even though you intended to do harm to me, God intended it for good, in order to preserve a numerous people as he is doing today. So have no fear. I myself will provide for you and for your little ones." Friends, scholars believe that this is a profound turning point, both for Jacob's family and also for all of Israel. For most of the book of Genesis, we have seen little reconciliation in the way of family. And usually it's only one family member who's walking away with God's blessing. In this moment, the author of this story draws on the iconic line, "Do not be afraid." This is a phrase that God speaks over and over again. We see him speak it to Adam and to Abraham, and then again much later, we see this come up when an angel is speaking to Mary, the mother of Jesus. The phrase, "do not be afraid," is a way for us to identify the divine presence of God in this moment. God is right there with these brothers as they make sense of their relationship and what is going to happen next. As Joseph speaks these words of blessing and care, it's also similar to the blessings we have seen offered to the patriarchs before in this book. However, when those blessings were offered to Abraham, to Jacob, God only offers them to those one person. This has never been stated by a human, right? Only by God's divine booming voice. And it's never been given to a family. This story is different. So we watch this blessing, this genuine care be extended, this moment of forgiveness and reconciliation. And through the words of Joseph, the reader becomes aware that God is right there in the middle of it all. It is almost as if in a community and family that was brimming with dissension and pain, this story offers a new way to be and exist in the world. It reminds us that we have the power and value and choice while recognizing the complicated experiences of family members and other relationships in parts of our lives. No one says that Jacob's family lived happily ever after. The truth is, we don't know what happened to this family. But what we do know is that something changed. God showed up, and the Spirit moved. And the hope for change was voiced, and Joseph opened the door. Friends, truth in that moment is saying that healing takes time. Forgiveness is a journey, and it is complicated, especially when it comes to the ones we love and the ones who have caused us the deepest pain. And there are times when no one can think of anything natural in this world to say. And there are times when words like "I love you" and "I'm sorry" opens the path forward. And there are still other times when the best we can do is say, "I can't forgive you, but God can." And that's enough. Because God is right there in the middle of that road, beckoning us down the road of change and hope, from the depths of our deepest pain to our paths of forgiveness and offerings of kindness. God is right there, inviting us down that road. So friends, This is the story of the family of Jacob. It is their story. It is Israel's story, and it is our story. And this is good news. Thanks be to God.